like we are at the top of the half hour, so we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this FormFest 2025 presentation. As Colleen has put into the chat, please move yourself over to the session tab of your Ring Central screen on the right-hand side, and you'll be able to type questions to us throughout the presentation in the Q&A tab. You're also invited to share a greeting and shout out where you're calling in from in the chat function. And we're going to go ahead and jump into our presentation. My name is Izzy Hershey-Reyes. I'm joining you from Washington, D.C. today. I'm a senior product manager with Exigy. We're the technology partner with the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. I'm joined by three of my wonderful colleagues who will introduce themselves shortly. And we are so excited to be talking to you all a little bit today about some of the ways that we use forms to support the affordable housing search and application process in the Bay Area. So I'll invite my colleagues to introduce themselves, starting with you, Barry.
Thank you so much, Izzy. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to be here today to talk about our work and just grateful for the work that you're all doing, to improve forms because we need that. And it's exciting to be here as a presenter this year to this event. So my name is Barry Roeder, and I manage the Doorway program for the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. We're a housing portal that's an extension of earlier housing portal efforts. I will pass it over to Babs.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Babs Steffenderfer. I work with Barry on the Doorway Housing Portal. I'm coming to you from San Francisco today, and I thought I'd unblur my background. This is a map of the Bay Area, if you can see it, so just in case you forget where we're at. But great to have you all with us and excited to get into it. I'll pass it over to Glenn.
Hi, everybody. I am Glenn. I'm the Doorway Technical Operations Manager and kind of the Doorway nerd. And just basically, I work on various application development and infrastructure and operations things with Doorway. And I'm excited to talk about this thing that was kind of my baby for a while.
Great, thank you all. Yeah, let's get into it. As we begin our presentation, again, a reminder, please go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A tab. I already see one in there. Thank you all so much for engaging. We're going to reserve time for questions at the end, but we will also be responding in this tab and pulling forward particularly relevant ones as we move through our presentation. And so today, you've been hearing a lot about different forms, and in particular, a lot about digitization and modernization efforts. But today, we're going back to paper. And so we're going to teach you all how to say goodbye to manual review by leveraging AI tools for reviewing your paper form submissions. So we're going to share a little bit about the work that we do in the affordable housing search and application process and how we got here, why paper remains an important part of the service that we provide to Bay Area residents, what challenges paper application submissions have caused for BAHFA and our partners, and then how we're using AI to make that easier and reduce administrative burden. And so with that, I'll invite Barry to talk a little bit about how we got here.
Thanks so much again, and welcome to everybody again who's joined us. So yeah, the task that we knew at hand, and I left the private sector to work in my first public sector job for the city of San Francisco for the mayor's office of Housing and Community Development, develop a new housing portal. And really the focus was to try and make it easier to quote, find, and apply for affordable housing. So affordable housing folks, the developers and partners that build that stuff are working really hard to cobble together resources to just get it built, right? And it's like, okay, do we have enough money? Okay, great. And sometimes there's a sense of like, okay, you know what? We're so busy, we don't have time to worry about how these units are placed. Somebody will need them. Okay, great, fine. But then like, okay, if I'm looking for affordable housing, how do I find out about this stuff? And you hear crazy stories like, oh, that day I decided to take a different way home from work, and I saw this building and I saw a sign out. It's like, wow, is that how we let people know about this thing? So the idea is let's do something better. So we built the Dahlia San Francisco Housing Portal. And we subsequently created other portals in the Bay Area, other regions. And now as Doorway, we're trying to pull them all back together, because it won't surprise you to hear that housing really is a regional problem. It's like, well, wait, I work in that jurisdiction, but I live in that jurisdiction. Do I have to look at two different portals? We want the answer to be no. So you see a quick image on screen about what that looks like, our housing portal. And let's go to the next slide, please. So this covers a little bit more about the history of Dollar Bloom, some of the things that we talked about. So we were fortunate to have the assistance of the Google.org Foundation and Exigy, which is a B Corp that Izzy works for, which has been with us, who's been with us every step of the way, which has been really lovely the last 10 years as we work on these things in San Francisco and the Bay Area. And Exigy works on these things beyond, by the way. I noticed there was a question about other efforts in the state of California. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Thanks for that Q&A question. So we were able to sort of build a place where it's like, okay, here's sort of the one-stop shop, if you will. And by the way, little secret, I don't think we've really fully realized that one-stop shop thing. We still constantly want to put more things in there. There's more listings that we want to get in there. It's a constant process, especially region-wide. We have 100 and something like 6 or 9 jurisdictions. It's a lot to sort of get everyone to participate, but we're getting traction, which is great. And so I was able to work sort of as an external task, as I mentioned earlier, to get other jurisdictions involved in this. So next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned, we got to, in 2023, the launch of the Doorway Housing Portal. And take a look at housingbayarea.org. That'll redirect. That's not our current URL, but it'll redirect. It's a much easier one to remember than our actual URL. We're working on it. So it does include a standard digital short form pre-application. What does that mean? That means that, well, okay, so for a lot of processes, developers and property managers will say, okay, well, we need to get all this information from folks. So we need to know like where they work, and let's get some, tax returns and pay stubs, and it's like, oh, okay, hold on a second. Aren't we doing like a lottery or a wait list? So isn't there like a low chance of them actually being placed? Do we really need 12 to 15 pages sometimes of application plus this supplemental material just for them to like float to the top? Can't we just like ask them only the basic questions that we need for a lottery or wait list? And then if they float up to the top, great. Then we can ask for more from them. And then it's worth their time to provide that, because like, hey, they have a real shot at getting a unit. So that short form application is something that we worked on and we've continued to iterate on in the Bay Area, again, to just only ask the things that we really need. So this session, of course, is to talk about paper form, but just as a preamble, it's like, well, okay, well, let's not ask more things than we actually need. So in terms of sort of order of magnitude to date, just for the Doorway platform, this is not including Dahlia, but the Doorway platform and the other non-San Francisco portals, we've received over 200,000 digital applications, and it takes about less than 10 minutes to do on your phone. And then the other cool thing is that once you've done one, it pre-fills a lot of your answers on subsequent applications. So we're really, again, thinking about the housing seeker in particular in this way, and how to make it easier for them. But let me transition it over to Babs to tell you a little bit more about our process.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, and thank you, Izzy. So, right, we have a really excellent, we're really proud of our digital application. And we know that some folks still prefer paper. There are a number of reasons for that. One is there's still a digital gap. Folks have maybe limited access to a laptop. I mean, you can apply on your phone, but folks have limited access to, a smartphone, just the skills of navigating a website, navigating an application online. And then there still persists a lack of trust in government's provision of digital services. Maybe it's growing, but like folks providing their personal information online can give people some nervous feelings. Maybe they don't quite trust it. So I am really interested in working on shrinking that gap and increasing trust in government digital services. But until those things happen, we know that providing a paper option is still going to be really important and critical to providing the service that we are here at Doorway. So do you want to go to the next slide, Izzy? Thank you. So prior to the launch of Doorway, a majority of owners and operators of affordable housing used paper for their applications, and property managers would by hand submit or type in their paper applications forms. They're not useful unless they're digitized, right? So they had to digitize all of them. And application questions varied across properties. As Barry mentioned, it'd be like a bespoke application by property, depending on the reserved community type or local preferences that apply to the property. So this process is pretty ripe for human error. The 5% of applications submitted, that used to be a lot more. That's about our standard now. But prior to Doorway, it was much greater. Some operators exclusively used paper to collect applications. So our first innovation was to say, hey, let's create a universal application, one application with all the questions that anyone might need to submit for a opportunity. It's not as short and quick and easy as our slick digital form, but it is universal. So it applies to any listing on Doorway. We cover 9 counties of the Bay Area. That's a lot of properties, a lot of potential variation. And the universal application aims to cover all of those sort of unique differences among the properties that we list on Doorway. And we also said, you know what, we're going to handle this process for our property managers. There were a bunch of challenges, as I described, again, ripe for human error in this very important process that we were like, we will take this on. We know it's important, and we have the regional sort of scope and vision, so we'll take this on for our property managers. But yeah, the first innovation was really like, hey, can't we all just use one paper form for all of these properties? It helps the applicants become familiar with, okay, they know what to expect when they see this form, they're familiar with it, and it helps the property owners and operators. They don't have to be juggling different versions of the form, based on property and all those things. So that was our first innovation. But of course, that's a lot of work to place on ourselves. I mean, again, 5% is our current sort of standard for paper apps, but when you scale 5% to hundreds and thousands of applications, that's a lot of work for a team. When we're at our largest, it's 3 of us. So we knew it was not sustainable to think that we would be by hand manually entering in all of the paper applications that we receive for listings across the Bay Area. And so maybe right now I'll pass it over to Glenn to talk about our next innovation.
Yeah, this kind of came out of an ideation session around how we would handle paper apps. I brought up the idea that there's with the advent of AI, a lot of innovation around document scanning and what they call object character recognition and handwriting recognition. And so I offered that to investigate several of the options that we had and came down to a tool set that I think that worked pretty well. And I think we can come down to the next screen. So with a lot of help from a lot of people at MTC, including Sean Bueller, who's sitting in the audience, we created um, a solution that used at the core of it Microsoft Power Automate to use its document automation step to scan paper applications that were scanned to PDF from our MTC scanners. And in order to allow us to have some sort of intermediary place where we could review forms for accuracy and all that, we created a Microsoft Power App. It was important to us to use the tools that we had available to us so that we could quickly ramp up a solution. And we're a SharePoint and Power Apps shop, and so that was a big that was a big um, leg up for us, was a lot of the things that Microsoft was providing. And that we also, Doorway resides in AWS space, and so we created some things called lambdas, which are basically mini functions that allowed us to communicate with the Doorway API, which sits behind the firewall. And they're basically just free floating scripts that take web requests. If you haven't looked into lambdas, and if you're a programmer, I would strongly recommend them, because they're very easy to very rapidly get going. And I think that's, for an awful lot of places, that's a very helpful thing. So we can move on to the next one. So this is how it works. The admin of the paper apps process, in this case Babs, but we're also now moving to a lot of other people, um, uh, goes and scans the paper apps in our large scanners, at MTC. We can go to the next slide. Um, After they get scanned, the forms become a PDF, and they sit in a SharePoint directory. Power Automate script kicks off whenever there's a new form out there, and it uses AI to read the form and translates that into text, into computer text. We then insert that into a SharePoint list, which sits behind a Microsoft Power App, and it gives us the ability to give people the ability to sort of do a lot of error checking, and making sure that we're that everything was scanned properly. To kind of give you an idea, the current industry standard is about 94% accuracy with handwriting, which some of that's pretty astounding, in the sense that it's able to read uh, handwriting that it takes me several minutes with my eyes to actually figure out what they're writing. And so it's actually pretty incredible. But 94% accuracy on a form that has 100 fields or so, if you include all of the check boxes that are on the field, you're still basically guaranteed of having anywhere between 6 to 10 errors. And so it is still has an aspect of a manual process, but we have a great deal of success in terms of, like, it reduces the footprint of this by a lot, just handling this rather than typing them in manually. So, and lastly, the we have a button that is a push that basically sends a web call to our AWS Lambda, and sends the application information into it, and it puts that into the Doorway API. And we have an error status on the field, just in case something goes wrong in terms of that communication. And so, with both the status and a message. So that's the general flow of how it works. And yeah, so the training and setup, obviously, uh, the training people in terms of how to use the scanners, especially since it seems obvious that they work like a copy machine, but once you're looking at needing to put them into specific directories in a OneDrive or SharePoint file, you kind of got to give some additional adaptation to that. Uh, there's also access issues that need to be set up, in terms of, like, giving them access to scanner functions and to Power Apps, and the other things that give that. And then the last thing that is important is to try and give as much visibility as people can into the errors in a way that's user friendly. Uh, Computer errors can be very obtuse, and it usually we have to try and find a way to parse out what's there, and sometimes it still does not look very, very helpful, but it's any type of information we can give an end user is important. And
Yeah,
so,
maybe to interrupt there, there's actually a great Q&A question on that topic from Matthias, asking if the AI highlights sections that it's less confident in or flags things for review, or is our QA and review process entirely reliant on somebody, a human specifically, reviewing every single field?
the QA or the AI gives confidence levels, and I've looked at them in the past. My own personal experience with the confidence levels is that its level of confidence is not necessarily equate accuracy. And so, because I've seen things that it lists as 100% accurate that is not 100% accurate. Like, it'll probably, the biggest things that we run into in terms of inaccuracies are less in terms of like this person wrote Glenn and this put in Gleb or something like that, and more and this goes to the whole concept of AI hallucination and things like that, of like, if there's an empty field somewhere and then there's text by that field that's describing the field, an awful lot of times the AI grabs the field text. It's like, and so you'll see, what, you'll see things that are sort of very obviously form text stuck into like names or things like that because they didn't fill out an additional like person living in the household or things like that. So we have to do a lot of we go back, and every time we're scanning in things and creating a new version of our form, we try and figure out what we can do to make the AI a lot more comfortable with what we're putting together.
Can I add just a note too, that in the Power Apps tool that Glenn has built, there is an error message section. And when I go to send the form up into Doorway, if there is some error, the message field actually is pretty descriptive of what went wrong. It won't like highlight the places in the form that are inaccurate, but at least I can rely on, getting to Glenn's point about sometimes messaging can be really obtuse. He's built it so that at least it's a little bit descriptive so that I can understand it and I'm not like a engineer or technical person.
Yeah, we got a great question too from Eileen about that review process. Was that UI custom built, or did you have a current tool that you leveraged? Did you feel like it was seamlessly integrated, or is this a custom project from Glenn?
I could speak to that. It was for the most part custom by me. We leveraged, one of the positives with Microsoft Power Apps is that it does a good job of, you basically you start off by creating a SharePoint list or an Excel spreadsheet online, and literally it will read that and create fields for you. And so, is it always exactly what you want? No. And so, but it gives you the ability to sort of auto-generate what's there, and then you spend a fair amount of time futzing with display, like especially when you're talking about a large form, you have it will try and condense as much of that onto one page and one screen as possible, and so you have to spend a fair amount of time breaking that out into multiple pages and things like that. So that's really kind of where the pain point on the Power App is.
That's cool. Well, I'm going fast and furious on the Q&A questions. Thanks, keep them coming. And I'll encourage my colleagues to do that too while I take this last slide. And that is just to say, so a couple things just to summarize. there's a way in which I think what we've done, to toot our own horn here, is slightly miraculous, and not. It's both. And what that means is, it's really cool. It is still, I still get a rush in a geeky sort of way about taking a paper application over to copier, sticking it on there, pushing a button, and like it turns into digital. And as Glenn said earlier, there's sometimes like I can't even read. I sometimes, this is actually a cheat. I don't even know if Babs, Glenn, I know this. Sometimes I will put something through that process just because I can't read it otherwise. Sometimes the AI will read something that I'm like, oh my God, that is what it says. I did not know that. It's a fascinating thing. Does that mean that it's solved all our problems? No. As your questions point out, and as Glenn mentioned earlier, it's got a 94% accuracy rate. Well, that means there must be something we missed. So, as someone asked earlier, it takes about 2 minutes on average to go through an application to check, okay, did it make it through the AI? What does it look like? If you had to type that in manually, depending on the listing, some listings have more things going on than others or more fields. It could be 10 to 15 minutes to enter it from scratch. So there's definitely a value in this process. So we, as a second bullet point here is that, so our lovely dynamic forms, and by the way, on our paper applications, we say multiple times, hey, for the best experience, please submit this online, because then we'll only be asking you the questions that are actually relevant to your listing. But we can't do that for paper. So, okay, let's gather what we can. It can be really helpful, as I said, in our process, but it's really important for a human being to be in the loop. And let me answer something else too that you may have thought too. And some people, like my boss said to me, like, okay, do we really have to do these paper applications? Like, really? Well, I think the answer is yes. Because if we're talking about equity, people that just, as Babs was saying earlier in the presentation, for whatever reason, they just look, I don't have the device. I don't have the internet. I don't know how to do this. I don't trust this. And a lot of the paper applications we get are from people who are pretty low income and are maybe unhoused. And, it's just like, that's part of our service to the community. So of course we spend a lot more time still, even with this process, on a paper application than we would on a digital application. But you know what? It's part of our work. It's part of our charge, and that's what we do. So at least we're finding a way to improve it. So I think that takes us to the end of our presentation, Izzy, but I don't know if there's anything that you or any of my colleagues want to add before we take a look again at our questions, which I'm going to get right back to.
Yes, absolutely. So I did see a note in the chat about getting in touch. Please get in touch with us. We would love to continue this conversation. We love forms. We love improving them. We're very happy to be here talking a little bit about them today. I do also, there's been a couple of questions that Barry has been doing an amazing job responding to via text in the Q&A tab, but there's a couple here that I do want to just highlight for the good of the group. One about if the AI document reader is being used to interpret supplemental documents that were uploaded with the applications. So Barry said this in his response, but we do not require or even accept supplemental documents on the application on Doorway. It functions as a pre-application, and so we are asking for self-attested eligibility essentially at this point, with the idea that all of that supplemental information can follow in an additional round. I do also want to say, and perhaps this isn't exactly what you meant in this question, but the AI at this point is limited primarily to inputting fields from paper into our digital system. We have not yet deployed it in a way that is doing anything close to validation or interpretation. Anything that requires that level of thinking is still squarely on the human side of this process. And then additionally, we got a great question from Sierra about this working in languages other than English. Our paper form actually is really limited on free text responses. They're primarily text boxes or things like address fields, but it has been trained on our translated forms. So I believe it's 5 languages, including English, that we offer on Doorway, which includes 5 paper forms. So the AI model is trained to be able to scan in all 5 of those versions. I don't know, Glenn, if you wanted to share anything specific about training the model on the other language forms or anything like that.
Yeah, we haven't done the other language forms yet, largely because we have not gotten as many of them. But currently the Microsoft system supports anything written in sort of standard English letters, plus it does what's called simplified Chinese, which is great for most other jurisdictions in America, but the simplified Chinese was invented by the Chinese Communist Party in the 1950s, and the Bay Area's Chinese community is 100 years older than that, so most of the signage and government paperwork is using traditional Chinese characters, and so that kind of rules us out for that ability. And I think that it does do a few other character types, but I don't remember off the top of my head what it supports. And the other thing I wanted to throw in was with the AI, because and this I know is something of a scary thing, is like I should say it's important to say that what we're using is not generative AI, and that's, I mean, it's an old school AI, if that can be a term that's being used, in that it's not doing like and as it stands right now, especially when you consider that we're talking about personal information in these forms, I would be hesitant to really adopt something using generative AI to look at them. But that's kind of that's where that goes. Obviously, if there's not PII in your forms, you know, you can have at, but PII I would not recommend exposing to generative AI at this point.
Yeah, that connects really cleanly with a couple of questions. One from Sonia is about how we manage those privacy considerations, putting the information through Power Automate. They did not see anything about PII or using data for training on the Power Automate security and privacy page.
Mhm.
How have we and how has MTC approached that decision?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. I was just typing a response and I shortened it so I could jump in. So we're good timing on that one, Sonia. So yeah, so MTC, that was our parent organization, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, is known in the region, any of you that have had to work with us and us too, as real sticklers in terms of privacy, super sticklers. So in fact, we have an agreement with Microsoft that says, hey, listen, anything that happens in your universe is it's strictly controlled and contained, and you don't share, etc. I mean, without going into legalese, most of which I don't understand, frankly, and happily maybe, but it's quite protected. So that's how we manage that. So that's a really good question, and that's something that. So I was just answering a question before this, somebody about sort of what the hardware is. We use some Canon copiers, and I think, but anything that has OCR functionality and the ability to create and store files like a PDF or whatever would do it. But you would want to think about these things, and we have, like, what other entities are we involved in, and what sort of arrangements do we have with them? Our terms of use and privacy policy, which I'd mentioned in an earlier question, they're posted on our website. They're linked, in our paper forms. And just a note on that, we say to people, hey, if you can't access these forms, call us at this number and we'll print it out and we'll send it to you. But just those are things that we do pay attention to, and we would encourage you to think about. Yep.
We also, I'll just add, we, in the Doorway portal and in our own systems, we are careful to delete data after a certain date. So we, even folks, that was pretty radical when we talked about that with our owner and operator partners, that we will delete application data after a certain date, so that it's not kind of hanging around in the event that we do, get hacked or something.
And it also should be said that in terms of training the model, we do train the model with forms, but essentially what we do is we sit at a staff meeting and with the rest of the people in our sub agency BAHFA, and just hand out and say, fill this out with fake information. and then we use that to scan to train the model with, so that we're not, exposing it to real customer data when it's, being trained.
So there are a couple of questions in here about potential future applications of AI in this work. One from Mark, have you looked at using AI to do voice recognition for an application submitted over the phone?
It's a good question. So we are continuing. Yeah, I love being able to be candid with you all. Although we've created this process, again, any ways that we can reduce paper volume is still good for us. And so we haven't specifically looked at, an AI process to take that, but we have a new partner, Housing Inc. is their name. We're very happy to have them on board. That's helping us with user support. And one of the things that Babs is going to be piloting, this is super exciting, that she's working on, is the ability for someone to call a phone number, call Housing Inc., and just talk to somebody and give your application over the phone. And because we're outsourcing that at a cost that's less than sort of it's a Bay Area firm, but because it's less costly than Doorway staff, that makes some sense. And again, so the options will look like this: apply online, that's your best choice. You're going to get all the things you need, etc. The quickest way through it. Again, having pre-filled responses from previous applications, all that great stuff. Second option that we want to pilot is, don't want to do that, call somebody. And we're going to try that out. We have some anecdotal experience from a prior portal that we've since absorbed in the Bay Area that worked pretty well for them. And then the third option is, you still want to do the paper? Go for it. You can. Babs, anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay, great.
Great. We also have a question in here about our checking process and if it looks for maybe editorial or eligibility-based criteria. So a person who applied for a certain benefit but doesn't actually qualify based on what they answered. I think a really discrete example may be applying for a senior-only property at the age of 32 might mean you're not eligible. Or are we just checking to see if the field is populated or not?
Yeah, that's another good question. I'll jump in on that one. So we don't currently do that. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first of which is that we're often encouraged, even by our professional partners, so housing developers, property managers, to wait, don't screen out any applications that might have incorrectly answered a question, or maybe, we kind of want to see what comes in. So we realize that. So we're really nervous about, what if we told the AI the wrong thing and it screened somebody out? And that starts to fall into things like fair housing rules under HUD. I think HUD is still around. So, those sorts of things. But what you should know is that we are we do hear from our partners about, hey, is there any way we can sort of make, the eligibility of the applications higher? Are there some things you can do for us? So outside of this process, we are investigating some other ways in which we can do that, but I don't think we would want to do it right at this level. Debs, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, just to say, I do wonder how that would work for paper. We have considered that for our digital application. We call it yellow and red lights. If someone, for example, in a senior property puts in a date of birth and they're actually 35 years old, then we would have a yellow light, a little warning that says, hey, it looks like you might not be eligible for this opportunity. Are you sure you want to continue with your application? If we do that, if we iterate there, then it makes it so that the digital is just even that much better of an option versus paper. And it feels like we're moving a little bit further away from paper, or at least the quality of the paper would differ greatly than the quality of the digital application. So yeah, I wonder how we would be able to implement that through this paper form experience. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges is that digital forms can be much more nimble and provide feedback. And follow-up notifications, all of these really rich experiences that are extremely labor intensive to replicate for applicants who submit via paper. So this is one way that we have made that experience more equitable with less administrative burden. But as the digital form continues to evolve, it will likely beget more inequality between the two experiences that we'll have to come back to the table and figure out how to address. Okay, we have a couple of questions left. I see some replies are being typed in. We have a question from Anna about their org also being in the Microsoft universe, wondering which AI connector that you're using. And then maybe we can use that to sort of jump off and just say, for anybody who's interested in implementing something similar in their organizations, where can they start? And maybe what sort of tools might be available to them, Microsoft or otherwise?
Sorry, I was off looking for the AI connector before I unmuted myself. I know I'm pulling up my flow right now, but it's a standard Microsoft one that we use, and let me get the exact name of it, and I can plug it in.
Well, while you're looking for that, one thing to consider with adopting something similar are things that we've already touched on today. So is there a tool or a suite of tools that you're already using in your organization that allows for smoother integration with your workflows, less clunkiness there? That's a great place to start. And then also making sure that you're up on security and privacy best practices, as well as your organizational standards and policies, particularly when handling sensitive application data. Barry, Babs, Glenn, what other pieces of advice would you like to impart?
Yeah, I would say that at least for the Microsoft suite, it is super user friendly. And so Glenn has been able to train me. So now I can train the AI on any new forms that come in. So I would say it's really handy to have, someone technical on your team, at least for the setup of it, but you don't need like a, staff of engineers to do this thing once it's up and running. It does require a little bit of maintenance, but, someone like me who's like a housing specialist, not a technical specialist, has learned how to use the AI, how to train it, and how to update it. And then I would also just add too, in terms of the different languages, we found that, again, at least with the tools that we're using, it really it reads the location that things are placed in the form. So we found that we don't really need to necessarily fully train it on the other languages, because if you're using universal form and it's simply translated into other languages, it does a good job of picking up if that question is in around the same place as the English form that you've trained on. It will generally pick up the accurate information. So I would say just don't get too bogged down or overwhelmed by the need to train in all the various languages, because it does a pretty good job. And if you're going to be reviewing it, if a human eyes are going to be reviewing it anyhow, which I always recommend, at least at the end, then it might be enough just to train the English version.
Thanks, Babs. Hey, Glenn, I see we have one open question left, and that was just Anna's about the Microsoft connector. Did you find that by any chance? If not, we'll get.
Yeah, sorry, I posted it in the chat.
Oh, okay, great. Well, and I'll find it there. Well, there it is. Okay, I will drop that. Thank you. I will drop it over in the AI question, or sorry, in the QA question, and then we will have it. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Cool.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to hear about our form experience today. If a question, a comment, or just a desire to talk more arises for you, again, please don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us. We would love to keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Keep up your great work.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.